That power.
Ryan, who are some guys that are playing a lot more than maybe you thought they would even entering the season?
Well, I mean, certainly some of the freshmen and the younger guys, I would say, would probably be top of the list. Yeah, I'd probably say most of the freshmen, you just don't know when they come in. For older guys, I mean, it's good to see Mitch Rossi, doing what he's doing. Trying to think on defense if there's anybody else.
Steel Chambers.
Yeah, I guess that's a great one. Yeah, Steele, made the transition over from running back, and so to say last spring we would expect him to be playing linebacker as much as he has. Yeah, I would say he's a pleasant surprise.
And just a quick follow-up on Steele. Do you expect his role to continue to increase as the season progresses?
Yes. Yep.
Second row, right, Joey Kaufman, Columbus Dispatch.
Ryan, last year after the Indiana game, we kind of talked about the pressure they put on Justin, and they were blitzing like almost every snap. What was the challenge of that, and do you think they could try to replicate something similar this week?
Yeah, I think it was a high risk, high reward. We had a bunch of big plays early on, and then towards the end of the game, we were kind of just hanging on, and so we got to continue to be aggressive. And some of the decision making in that game wasn't very good, but they're a good defense. They have good scheme and good players, so we're going to have to be on our game in terms of execution.
Did they do anything differently with a new defensive coordinator this year, or is the fact that Tom Allen has defensive background?
Yeah, it's very similar. Coach Allen has kind of run that defense for years. He's had some guys that bring in their own flavor to it, but the crux of the defense has stayed the same.
Third row left, Dan Hope, 11 Warriors.
Hey Ryan, the last time we had talked to you about Quinn Ewers, you said he wasn't ready to play in a game yet. I'm just curious, kind of what have you seen in his development to this point, and would he be ready now if you guys needed him?
No, he's not quite ready yet. It's going to be a little while. He's really doing a good job of starting to learn how to be a college football player, and there's a lot that comes with that. I think he's starting to get more accustomed to the day-to-day grind and what it's like, and starting to get some buddies and that type of thing. But we'll continue to work with them and see. You never know, but I think it's something that's probably going to happen more towards we get into bowl practice in the winter and then into spring practice next year.
Quarterback room in general, like this bye week, this past week, what are kind of things that you maybe emphasize with those guys, try to work on as they continue to develop?
Well, just taking meetings to the field and understanding the game plan on a week-to-week basis, and getting as many mental reps as they possibly can, because you have guys who aren't getting all the reps, and they have to make sure that they get the mental reps as well, standing in the back, actually body repping it, so that and even for CJ, when Kyle and Jack are getting reps, he can go through and say, okay, we ran this play against this coverage, we run this play against that coverage, and you're not always going to be able to body rep every play in a game, so against every look, and so that's a big part of it.
Going to go far right, Tony Gertman, Buckeyes.
Ryan, regarding your offensive line, how much did last year play into where you had a different offensive line sometimes every day in practice to allow them to kind of do that this year seamlessly?
I hadn't really thought of that, but I guess you're right. There was just so much moving around last year that it wasn't a big deal this year. But at the end of the day, the idea is that if guys are playing at starter level, that we play them, and that's at every position. And this year we found some guys, like Matt has jumped in there, and so we've played some depth.
Second row, middle, Bill Rabinowitz, Columbus Dispatch.
Ryan, did you get done, or what did you get done last week? Were you comfortable with what you did get accomplished?
Yeah, I think so. The first thing, obviously, on a bye week is to evaluate where you're at, certainly personnel-wise and schematically, and how you're coaching things, and find tendencies and different things like that. But then you also have the rest part of it, midway point of the season, make sure that the guys are rested up. But then we also want to work on fundamentals and get some guys some work and do some teaching. We did that Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. And so we'll see. We got a really big practice today. We got back at it yesterday, but today's a typical Tuesday practice, and looking forward to a lot of energy and spirit today.
The second half of the season is going to be a gauntlet, obviously. How prepared do you think you guys are for that right now?
We'll see. I mean, I think we're in a lot better place than we were at the beginning of the season, and we got some rest. So now it's going to be a big run, like you said. But all we can do is, I've heard the cliche a million times, take it one game at a time, one day at a time, and that's what we're going to do. And we got to go on the road, and it's a night game there, and they'll have a good atmosphere, kind of like the last times we played on the road and in a conference game, and we're going to get their best shot, and they have some good players and good schemes, so that's all we can do, and just take it 1 week at a time and keep building, which is what we've done to this point.
Second row right, Austin Ward, Letterman Ross.
Ryan, you've talked a lot in the past about the expectations for your starting quarterback with first-round pick, Heisman, and all that you make that clear when that guy has that job, that's the pressure that comes. When something like maybe the Heisman starts to become more of a potential reality for CJ, do the conversations then have to change about handling that, or because you've made it clear from the start, does that alleviate that?
Well, I think it goes back to the conversation that, when someone gives criticism or praise, you have to treat it the same way. And that you have to stay focused, you have to stay poised, and I use the term all the time, you can't ride that roller coaster. And, just like early on, there was plenty of criticism to go around, and now there's praise coming, and it's the same thing in my mind, and that's what we talk about. And so, staying focused and being disciplined enough to it's 1 week at a time. And if you don't believe that, go out and lose a game, and then all of a sudden, you're right back to where you started. So that's the challenge that not just CJ, a bunch of our guys, our whole team has had to embrace here, and it's something that's being relayed to them.
It seemed like it took maybe 4 or 5 weeks for Dwayne to find his voice a couple of years ago, and for Justin to become that leader. Where do you think CJ is in that part of being that go-to guy on the offense?
Yeah, I think he's done certain things well. I think he communicates well with those guys, and I think his relationships, with the players on offense is strong. I think he's done a good job of that. And the better he plays, the more energy he has. And he's still a young player, so he still has a ways to go. But I'm encouraged with what I see in terms of leadership.
Third row middle, Bill Landis, The Athletic.
Ryan, I know some of the publicly available grades and the numbers don't necessarily reflect what you guys have internally, but Matt Jones, with those numbers, looks like he's playing not only as one of your best linemen, but one of the best linemen in the country. I know you did a lot of shuffling before the season to get your best five. If the best five starts to change at all throughout the course of the season, do you consider shuffling then too? And is Matt giving you guys anything to think about?
I think he's played well when he's been in there for sure. I think a lot of the guys have played well. But that's part of, the bye week is to go through and look at the personnel and figure out who gives us the best chance to win. And we'll always try to put the best players out there, yeah.
And along the lines of the pressure that Indiana showed you guys last year, just how do you think CJ's been in identifying that stuff, setting the front the right way, calling the right protections?
I think he's been solid. I think this will be a bigger challenge this week. They like to bring a lot of pressure, and so we got to do a great job of identifying that and have a great plan. But I think he has done a good job of that. But again, the challenge is going to start increasing week in and week out, and so that's on his plate this week, and certainly with the offensive line as well.
Third row middle, Nathan Baird, Cleveland.com.
I think it's kind of along those same lines. What does a quarterback have to have in order to kind of make those adjustments to those things he hasn't seen yet? And especially for him, I mean, Justin was in his third year. He's doing this, for the sixth time.
Right.
So what is it about a quarterback that and what do you guys have to do to prepare him for that?
Yeah, I think it's always on an individual basis. What kind of foundation did they have coming here? How much did they play in high school? What kind of system did they play in? And then the second part of it is the mental part. Is can they visualize things? Can they project what they may see? Can they watch film and then take the meeting to the field? All those things come into play, and every guy's unique in that way. And so you try to do the best you can to explain to them what's coming, how they need to prepare, give them a clean plan to allow them to see things the right way, and then let them go play. Because at the end of the day, they have to go compete. Things are going to come up in a game that you can't prepare for. And so you want them to have a clear mind when they go on the field.
Switching gears a little bit, I know you were, I think, one of several coaches who came through Indianapolis when they were recruiting DeJuan Jones. And it seemed like part of that, from talking to people, was sort of an analysis of how much does he like football? How committed is he to this? How much was that part of what you guys were assessing then? And then what convinced you that he was serious about football and could do this?
Well, he told me, and I believed him. He loves basketball, And sometimes I say he's a skill player in a big man's body. That's kind of what we see with Dewan. He went to one of my son's AAU basketball games, and he wasn't in the gym for more than 2 minutes before he was yelling at the refs and yelling at my son and the team and why they're not doing this and that. He loves to play. He really does. The thing that's been the challenge for Dewan is the daily grind of football. You know, when you play basketball, you go out there and you shoot layups and you run up and down, and you're always playing. In football, especially when you're playing the offensive line, there's no ball. There's not a lot of games. And so that adjustment has been something that he's worked through, but he's come out the back end of it. And if he continues to embrace that grind, his ceiling's really, really high.
Second row left, Stephen Means, Cleveland.com.
Just a little bit more, CJ. When, in your experience with first-year quarterbacks, when do you kind of see it? At what point in the season do you see it click in terms of, I mean, you're a play caller,
Yeah.
and him knowing, okay, we're calling this, but why we're actually calling this play?
Yeah, I think that grows every game. You know, you start to understand exactly what you're saying, you know, is, hey, when we call this play, here's what we're thinking. This is what we're looking for. You know, we're looking to take a shot. We're looking to, you know, get a completion. We're looking for this type of blitz here, you know, those type of stuff or that type of stuff. And so that's all part of it. But the biggest thing is, as we head into these games, is it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for everybody. And he's got to continue to be tough, physically tough, mentally tough, and emotionally tough. And that's where, if he keeps growing in that area, then we got a chance.
Is that timeline similar with every young quarterback, or does it kind of vary from person?
I think it varies. Yeah, I think it's unique to each guy. But yeah, there's certainly a time where, you know, you look at certain guys, and sometimes it's in practice, sometimes it's in games, sometimes, you know, you never know when it is. You just you see traits in somebody where you start to believe them, you know, and it's not just one thing. It's over time. There's a body of work where you build trust with the coaches, and that's really what everybody's trying to do, not just the quarterbacks. Is every time you come in the building, every time you go to practice, every time you play in a game, you're trying to build trust. Same thing with the coaches. You're trying to build trust with the players, and that's by what you do and how you do it. And if you bring it every day and you build that trust between the player and the coach, that's when, you know, a lot of success happens.
Over here to the right, Don Barry, WBNS TV.
Coach, football is a game of repetitiveness. You get on a roll over and over. You take a break. Is there any concern getting back on a roll with a young team? And what can you do as a coach to get them, you know, because they were rolling?
I thought our prep the last 2 weeks leading into the bye week was excellent. And then because of that, what you're saying, what we did last week is we kept a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday practice the same way that we had going into the last 2 weeks. And then we came right back. Usually what we would have done is maybe have it a little bit different this week, but we didn't. We went out in helmets yesterday, and then today will be a typical Tuesday so that we can keep that same work week going, because I thought that was one of the biggest things we finally got into, kind of like into week 3, week 4, was our routine. A routine that our players didn't know and our coaches probably forgot about because of everything that happened last year. So that's something that we've been focusing on.
Indiana always seems to play you guys tough. Just what do you expect Saturday night over there?
Always play us tough. Always have really good scheme and play us hard. You know, and it comes different ways. You know, you think about the game a few years ago. It was really close early on, and we were able to pull away. Last year, we were up early, and they came back. You got to play 4 quarters against Indiana, and so we're gonna have to plan on doing that.
Right behind him, Clay Hall, WSYX.
Ryan, how much time are you spending with the defense now? Are they on their own? Do you monitor what they're up to, obviously?
Yeah, I check in periodically, and certainly after the games and at certain times during the week to find out where we're at and conversations about the game plan going in and things that I see. But the last week or so, I've kind of stepped away a little bit and allowed them to operate.
And right behind Clay, Adam King, WBNS.
You kind of talked about the confidence of this team growing since the Oregon game. Coming off the bye week with such a stretch ahead of you guys, where is the confidence and mentality of this team?
Well, I think that they start to see themselves playing better. They're starting to believe in the guy next to them. They're starting to believe in themselves. And anytime you can do that, you know, that's exciting and it brings energy. So we got to pick up from where we left off a couple weeks ago. And it starts with a great week of practice. You know, I can tell you probably midway through the week how it's going to go based on how we practice. And the good news is our guys believe right now. You know, I think they're excited about what these next 6 weeks can bring, and certainly what this week is going to bring.
Fourth row middle, Rob All, Columbus Dispatch.
Ryan, you saw what happened with Iowa. So far, so good for you. You've avoided the big upset. What's the psychology of getting guys, players, to believe that they can do it, and also believing that it can happen to them, how to avoid that? I know it's preparation, but what about psychology?
Well, I think I've been saying it a lot, and I think it's just what we've really focused on, for the last 4 or 5 weeks, is that if you do it in practice, if you do it on a Tuesday and a Wednesday really well, then you can have great confidence going into the week because you've already done it. It's like going into a test and having the answers to the test. If you're unprepared for a test, boy, that's a bad feeling. But and that's the one way for us that we build confidence in the psychology of it all. In terms of, week in and week out, we know here we're going to get everybody's best shot, and we have to bring it. And the first thing we have to do is go back to fundamentals, which is taking care of the football and tackling and using our hands inside when we're blocking and being smart and disciplined, understanding, especially early in the game, field position football, playing well in the red zone. All those type of things are critically important because the only times we get ourselves out of whack is when those things don't go well. And if we continue to work on playing really hard, playing really tough, but those things right there in the fundamentals of the game, then we feel like we got a chance.
You've been on both sides, not here, but I'm sure you've seen both sides of it when you've upset teams and now. What happens in game when things start to go sideways? What's the challenge? How do you get it back together? Because I'm sure it feels like a snowball rolling down.
Yeah, well, I think you have to have a plan before. And it's something that we talk about a lot too, is it's usually going to go one of 3 ways. We're either going to go up early in the game, in which case we got to keep bringing it. You can't let them back in. It's going to be back and forth. And when that's the case, you just keep swinging. Or we go down, like we've been at certain times this year at halftime. And when that happens, we got to stay together. We can't splinter. We can't start to try to make plays. We just have to go back to playing one play at a time in a team fashion. And then you can get yourself back into a game. You can't get it all in one play. And I think sometimes what happens is, somebody starts to press to make a play, and then we get out of whack. So those are the 3 things we talk about, and having that plan, so we've talked about it before we actually get into that situation.
Right next to Rob, Pat Murphy, 24/7.
Ryan, you've talked about what makes Indiana a challenge, but obviously they're not having the season they expected. When you've watched the film, do you see things that have led to, obviously injuries, but things that have led to sort of a disappointing year, or maybe things that you guys need to be aware of because they haven't done those well that are factors in this game?
Well, I think they've had some injuries, and they're trying to fill those gaps a little bit. And I'm sure they'll be getting some guys back here healthy. They've played some good teams. They've played some really good defenses, and so when you combine all of those things, and you're off by a little bit here or there, a team that maybe doesn't have a great record is a lot better than you think. And I think this team is much better than their record indicates.
Sort of similar to Rob's question about the mentality of things. When you have a game like this, night game, but then you have a game next week where everyone's kind of been talking about, you even mentioned the challenge is coming. How do you keep the team focused to have those days in practice that you need to then go into that game, get the job done here, so that now you can look forward to next week?
Yeah, I would say that this team should never, be looking at anything other than the game ahead of them. And we've learned that lesson. We understand exactly what's going on. So we're still a work in progress, and we got to bring it every week, and we know that. And I think, that's not something that, we're not going into this game undefeated. It's not like that. We got a lot of respect for Indiana, and this is going to be a hard road game. Everybody in the Big Ten's playing well this year, and you got to bring it every week.
Second row right, Tim May, Letterman Row.
When you go against a team like this, Ryan, their defense, et cetera, you talk about pre-snap reads, quarterbacks getting an idea what's going on, making a call, et cetera. But how much is it on the offensive line to have their head on a swivel, et cetera, be alert? How much does it fall on them finally?
It's big, and there's a lot of work that gets put into that, and it's 5 guys working in harmony together, and the communication is critically important. And so, all the calls have to be made, and whether it's a 2-man slide, a 3-man slide, a 4-man slide, a 5-man slide. Everyone's got to be working together in the pass game. And then they have to finish their blocks. But then in the run game as well, making sure they understand when they're on their own, when they're working with somebody else. There's a lot to that, and a lot of preparation that goes on in that room.
Yeah, that's kind of a basic, thought too. They got to be on. But does this offensive line, is it showing that maturity?
Well, I think they like football. And so anytime you have a bunch of guys who talk football, who want to get it right, who take very seriously the calls, and they just, when I see them standing in the back, they're talking about the calls. They're talking about what if this happens. That's when you know you got a pretty good unit there. And I'm very encouraged with just across the board, the guys on our whole team, not just the offensive line, who are talking ball. I mean, they like football. You know, it's sometimes you go around teams, they're in the back talking about, you know, the basketball game last night or what's in the video game or whatever. These guys are talking football, and I think that's encouraging.
Quickie, Haskell Garrett, Cam Brown, do you expect them back this week?
I do.
We'll wrap things up. Fourth row middle, Doug Lamarice, Cleveland.com.
Ryan, since Tregon Henderson had his big breakout game, I think he's had 8 and 16 carries the last 3 games. I know he had the one game where he was a little dinged, but have you guys discussed, I'm sure you have, just the plan for a freshman running back who's your #1 back, who didn't play high school football last year, who you want in prime shape for the end of the year, and how you'll try to manage him the second half of the season?
Yes, yes to all of those. I think part of that is just the way the games have shaken the last couple of weeks. But like you said, it's a long season, and you know we're trying to gradually build. But I think he's in a pretty good place as we head into these last 6 games.
And follow up on DeJuan Jones, with the way you guys are recruiting, you know, you could just take super highly talented, highly rated guys across the board and fill your whole class. A guy like DeJuan, who maybe has traits, maybe a little more raw, not highly rated, whatever, do you seek out those guys? Do you want to roll the dice on a guy or two in each class like that? I don't want to say boom or bust, but the idea of like, well, maybe he's less of a sure thing than some other guys, but man, if he hits, holy moly. Do you want them as a plan of recruiting?
Yes, but I think you have to be smart about how many of those guys you take, and I think that's part of the puzzle. And I think, you know, to answer your question about the recruiting, just in general right now, I think you really have to recruit guys that want to be at Ohio State, guys that want to be Buckeyes, that understand what being a Buckeye is. Because the minute, you know, something doesn't go well, you know, they could walk out the door. And so we're really taking that to heart. You know, we're really evaluating all these guys and what we think, and really trying not to look at the stars or look at, you know, who's recruiting them, but what do we think and what is the right fit for Ohio State. And I think we've done a good job of that, but we have to continue to focus on that as we move forward. But there are certain situations where you see traits, like you said, and can we develop him? You know, if you take too many projections, you could put yourself in a bad spot. But that's an example of, certainly we want to take guys who have tremendous traits that want to be at Ohio State, want to be a Buckeye, and willing to put the work in. And then DeJuan's an example of that.
Great. Coach, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.